if your expectations are as bargain basement low as mine are, and you just want the killing not to stop, because the killing has not stopped, if you just want the killing to slow down markedly, if you want your genocide slower, and we are at a point after 2 years of this slaughter that a slower genocide is a huge victory for humanity.
Hello and welcome to the More Freedom Foundation podcast. I'm Murray, in charge of podcasting, and in charge of politics, as always, is Robert Morse. How are you this time?
Oh, I'm all right, Rory. I'm a little satisfied and a little chagrined, actually.
Okay, what's got you in such a mood?
Well, it's we try to avoid giving too ringing judgments on this channel, but we like to reserve judgment. We like to hang back and only call things the way that we actually see them.
Yeah.
But I think I'm a little chagrined at how we reserved judgment on Milei in Argentina, and I guess I'm a little satisfied because we now know the answer, and the answer is that libertarian politics are a complete disaster everywhere they are tried.
So would you call it a proper libertarian country?
Well, not Argentina, of course,
What they tried.
It is 100% a libertarian wet dream, and you can find all kinds of, from the National Review to Reason Magazine, all kinds of right-wing libertarian types talking about how Javier Milei is saving Argentina. And don't get me wrong, Argentina is in terrible, terrible trouble, but Milei has, instead of providing the miracle solution, Milei has driven them very, very far, further into the hole.
Because America seems to have helped them in two ways. It gave them 20 billion, was it?
Actually, Rory, as of yesterday, it's being jacked up to 40 billion. So essentially, the USAID budget that Trump and company were so proud to have cut is $50 billion a year. So the entirety of those savings almost has now been poured down the gullet of Argentina's failed libertarian experiment. I just want to say, we've done 2 episodes on Milei, and if you go back and look at that, I think in both of those episodes we're like, look, the US and the UK don't need any more libertarian politics. We've had 50 years of it. It's becoming a catastrophe. But places like France, places like Argentina, maybe they can really use it. Like Argentina has absolutely got a lot of real problems that have some relation to their approach to socialism or what. So we were willing to say, you know what? Let's give Milei a shot. It'll be painful. It'll be hard, but it should work. But if you're coming... if the result of 2 years of Milei's big happy experiment is coming to the United States for a $40 billion handout, I think we can say with complete satisfaction that this was not the right path for Argentina. In fact, this is making things worse for Argentina in the exact same way that Mauricio Macri did. When Argentina has a right-wing government, this is the second right-wing government of the century. Mauricio Macri was the first. The IMF and the United States open their checkbook and hand Argentina tons and tons of money, which has to be paid back.
Well, Argentina is very good at paying back its debts, isn't it?
Yeah. So the true debt catastrophe for Argentina was created by all the money that we loaned to them under the last right-wing government. So this isn't even going to help Argentina. This is just forcing Argentina another $40 billion in the hole. But it is certainly real money that the U.S. government is wasting on this sort of right-wing cranks government just because he does a good job of kissing Trump's ass whenever he wakes up. Does Milei make it through a day without kissing Trump's ass? I don't know.
But there's also another gift America's been giving Argentina, which is it said to China, you know what? We don't like selling soy to you, so please buy as much soy as you can from Argentina and Brazil.
Well, I don't think that's what the United States ever said. I think the United States desperately wants to sell that soy. But the fact that we are, giving Argentina a massive, massive bailout as their soy farmers are undercutting all those soy farming Trump voters is particularly bonkers. But I thought it was just sort of
So who are the true soy boys now?
Yeah, well, there you are. There you are.
Was China buying the soy, even though it was more expensive, as a sort of way of keeping America happy? What was the politics of buying more expensive soy?
I haven't looked into the minutia of the soy markets. I do know that there are an array of deals under Trump and Biden, and And now the new Trump, China's a lot less interested in these new
Yes.
deals and is basically making it pretty clear, which I think is becoming more and more obvious to people. I think Paul Krugman, obviously a little ideologically biased, but he came out with like, the United States is not losing the competition with China. The second Trump presidency means we lost. And I think that's a
Mm,
little too extreme and a little too, but it's
yeah.
pretty clear that 12 years of Trumpism and Biden is just, Trumpism light is obviously catastrophic for the United States and its ability to compete in the world. This is transparently obvious to anybody who's not watching cable news in the United States. Yeah, but that's not what we're going to talk about today. We're actually going to talk about a Trump victory today, and I think it is fair to call it a Trump victory.
Okay, because I've heard of
Mhm.
mixed things on it. This is the peace deal, ceasefire agreement between Gaza and Israel.
Yes. So it depends on what you want out of this peace deal or what you expect out of this peace deal. If you expect, as Trump has been trumpeting, the resolution of the issues of the Middle East, a new era for peace and happiness in the Middle East, obviously, that's not what this is. Obviously, if your expectations are as bargain basement low as mine are, and you just want the
Yeah.
killing not to stop because the killing has not stopped, if you just want the killing to slow down markedly, if you want your genocide slower, and we are at a point after 2 years of this slaughter that a slower genocide is a huge victory for humanity, yeah, it's a success. We do have, as of this recording, 6 full days of slower genocide, which is the second time Donald Trump has managed that, and this is now the second time where he has managed a longer period of time of slower genocide than Joe Biden managed between October 7th, 2023 and January whatever, 2025.
But could you argue Trump could have done this like immediately and not had to wait this
Well, I
long?
don't have to argue that, Rory. He did do it immediately. There was a ceasefire between January 19th, 2025 and March 17th, 2025, when Israel unilaterally blew up that ceasefire.
Hmm.
So he did it. I mean, all that Biden
Yeah.
managed in November of 2023, he managed to get 5 or 6 days of ceasefire, depending on how you measure it. Trump got 2 months in January, and it now appears that he has gotten it along. And if he's only gotten it for 6 days, that is a victory for Trump.
Okay.
This will be published, I guess, on day 9 or 10. And if he makes it 10 days, then it's also an extraordinary victory. And I think there's a chance. I think there's a chance. Like this problem is not solved by any measure. We're going to go through at the tail end of this episode, we're going to go through the 20-point plan
Hmm.
that Trump published on September 29th and has become more or less the basis for this ceasefire that started on October 10th. And we're going to go through just how illusory most of it is and how it's not going to solve anything. But I think what we can hope for here is that we will have arrived at the status quo that will be somewhat less brutally murderous status quo that will take us through to the next Arab Spring, the fall of all the Arab governments, and a complete reformulating of the region, which I do expect within the next decade or so. To be
Wow.
clear, this is less this is dramatically worse for the Palestinians than the status quo before October 7th. Israel is further into Gaza. They did do a slight withdrawal to a sort of yellow line that was published
Hmm.
by the White House. And if you look at this line, I mean, it is, I believe, Rafah is almost in so the large Palestinian cities, much of Gaza City, much of Khan Yunis are within the territory that the Gazans actually have some control over or might have some control over at some future point. But I think most of Rafah, which is maybe the third largest city in Gaza,
Hmm.
is entirely under Israeli control, and I don't see a pathway for that ever changing. So essentially, half of Gaza has been swallowed up. I expect, frankly, bombing of free Gaza, if free-ish Gaza, to
Hmm.
continue intermittently. Israelis have had a ceasefire with Lebanon for, what was it, most of a year now? And they've killed
Hmm.
probably a dozen people a week every week since that ceasefire came into place. I think that is likely to be the case in Gaza going forward, but we won't have 100 people a day dying
Hmm.
anymore. And that
And
is
the
it.
starvation shall have stopped for the most part.
Yeah, well, that's unfortunately a pretty open question 5 or 6 days into this ceasefire. And way too much depends on Donald Trump continuing to pay attention and continuing to ride herd on Netanyahu, which means that entirely too much depends on a variety of Gulf monarchs continuing to ride herd on Kushner, continuing to call up his father-in-law and saying, "Hey, man, all these billions of dollars that they've given us to manage might be contingent on, there no longer being a active genocide in Gaza." So we're going to get into all of
Do you
this.
think the attack on Qatar was the sort of genesis for this recent deal?
Yes, I think there's a lot of reporting that indicates that. There's a lot of dispute as to exactly how that dynamic went. Like, was Trump really surprised by the attack on Qatar?
Hmm.
I don't think anybody really thinks so.
Okay.
But I think most agree that Trump was surprised by the vehemence and the unified extent of this of the Gulf monarchs' opposition to this attack on Qatar. And the way that it didn't just motivate the Gulf monarchs, but probably most of Europe as well, to be like, wait a second, like, this is insane. We are going. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if, some kind of back channel communication from China was like, why are you bombing the Persian Gulf, like where all of our oil and gas resources come from? I think it was just a general level of insanity. But I think it's a multi-spectrum thing that brought this about. There are a lot of different reasons. I think you're absolutely right to highlight Qatar as like the main one in Trump world, because that's the lever of corruption that's getting pushed. But I think there's a lot of broader, there's two blonde women I
Okay.
was thinking of that might have had something to do with this, which would be Marjorie Taylor Greene, MTG, and Giorgia Meloni, the prime minister of Italy, right? I think those. So generally, if we look at what's been happening over the past year, it's pretty clear that Israel's attempts to cover up what they're doing, to justify what they're doing, which had a ton of support in European capitals and certainly from Joe Biden and Donald Trump, has really gotten shakier and shakier and is falling apart. I think that for Donald Trump personally, it was definitely Qatar and the pressure from the Gulf monarchs that have
Yeah.
given his family billions of dollars. But for just the broader environment that pressured not just Trump to do this, but all of the traditional defenders of Israel to sort of back off. You'll note that the crazy right-wingers in Israel's cabinet have yet to resign. Maybe that'll be different by Monday when
Okay.
this is being published. I think there's a general sense that Israel was losing far more than it was gaining from this ongoing conflict.
Well, because that's one thing.
Mhm.
I was listening to a Jon Stewart
Mhm.
podcast, and he had two people that were like on the side of Gaza,
Mhm.
and the stuff they were saying were like things I think you and I would have worried about saying when we first started this
Mhm.
podcast. So to have that on like mainstream
Yeah.
TV now
Yeah.
as like a normal point, it's sort of shocking that the orbiting window against
Yeah.
Israel has moved so far.
Well, yeah, because of Israel's actions. I mean, it's quite straightforward. But I think we should take a moment to mention just the full spectrum international pressure, and I think it was important. The global Samud flotilla, with the most famous member of that flotilla being Greta Thunberg. Is it Greta Thunberg or Thunberg? I can never remember.
Well, apparently she's the Antichrist, so
Yes, of course, according to the actual Antichrist, Peter Thiel. I mean, well, actually, do they both have confusing TH names that I can't remember how to
yes,
pronounce? Is it
that's
Thiel? Is
how
it Teal? Is
Satanism
it
works.
Thunberg? Is it Tunberg? Maybe they're both the Antichrist, Rory. For those who are not aware, Peter Thiel decided to give a long lecture series on the Antichrist. It's just
Yes.
really kind of indicating just how deranged and how on the edge of
He's a
losing
bit
it.
obsessed with it at the moment.
Yes.
And people kept asking him, like, was he the Antichrist? And he was like, he
Yeah.
couldn't really
Well,
answer
that's
it.
the Ross Douthat interview, which sort of prompted this, but it's just this is one of the main motivating factors of Silicon Valley, Facebook, the AI boom, what have you, and that's the mental state of these people right now should probably make people rather worried. But we're getting off topic. So we were talking about the global Samud flotilla. I think Greta came out recently over the past 48 hours and talked. This had been rumored, but she actually came out and said that, yeah, she was pretty seriously abused by her captors.
Hmm.
That none of that makes Israel look good. I mean,
No.
obviously nowhere near the same extent that they brutalize Palestinians every day, but she was certainly slapped around, kept in terrible conditions, this, that, and
But
the other thing.
also to bring just a sort of a wee side note, there was a stage of this conflict where I kept going, oh, you should be looking at all these other wars and all this, the Sudan civil war. So I'm looking at like deaths of conflicts over the past year. Ukraine's way in the lead, 50,000 plus, and second is Gaza war, 20,000 plus. So it's still above a civil war in Sudan, despite the very one-sided nature of this
No,
conflict.
it's absolutely horrific, and the world has reacted. I mean, this is Greta's second time on a
Yes,
flotilla
being
into,
detained.
but in the first one, I think it was a couple boats. This time there were 500 boats. I mean, this is becoming a serious drain on Israel's resources. And despite the fact that they absolutely did, interestingly, I think they selected Greta and also Jewish American members of the flotilla for special abuse. They can't
Okay.
actually kill these people because
No.
they understand just how outsized the reaction to that would be. Also, you had Spain and Italy provided naval support to this
Wow.
flotilla after it's now, I think, fairly open. It's been, I think it was suspected and then I think confirmed that Israel was carrying out minor harassing drone bombings of the flotilla when it was in Tunisia. So for
Mhm.
Spain and Italy to scramble military forces, specifically, Giorgia Meloni is very right wing, but also very like pro whatever, NATO,
Well,
pro.
she's a very canny operator.
Yes, but she is right wing and she is traditionally a friend of Israel. And she is traditionally a friend, as are most fascists. She is a fan of the current Israeli government. So Giorgia Meloni, fascist roots, loves Israel, loves Trump, is of the European leaders is probably the most powerful one with the closest affinity to Trump. I mean, let's keep in mind that like compared to Italy, like Hungary and Orban is still like
Oh, yeah,
small
yeah.
beans. And the fact that she, not I think out of personal instinct, but because there was a general strike in Italy in favor of Palestine.
Was it dock workers refused to, like, load any ships that had anything to do with
Well,
Israel?
that's been going on for months, but I think a general strike means, and I don't know exactly how rigorously adopted, means that like the whole country was brought to a standstill. Like not
Wow.
just the dock workers, but the people throughout every industry were encouraged, and I don't think suffered too many consequences for shutting down the fourth biggest economy in Europe for a day in the name of Palestine. So there is this environment of huge international pressure, and I think the figure of Giorgia Meloni is worth focusing on because Trump famously, proudly, loudly couldn't give less of a toss about what the Italian public wants. But oh wait, his fellow right wing goes to the same Steve Bannon parties. Giorgia Meloni is speaking out against what Israel's doing. Oh, and he's going to pay a little more attention. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is an absolutely bizarre, I think probably legitimately anti-Semitic political figure, has
Mhm.
recently, I think it's one theory I saw is that she actually believed that Donald Trump was going to do something about Epstein, which is,
Yeah,
yeah,
she was one of those
she was a true
ones.
believer and she's, had that shattered. So she has, not just on Israel, but on a range of topics, has been willing to speak out against Donald Trump and his sort of healthcare policies and whatnot, making her.
Does that show that it's much easier to, get peace in the Middle East than get the Epstein files released?
Maybe I don't know. Like we did our Epstein episode. God damn it! I don't
I know,
I
I
don't ever
know.
want to talk about it again. But unless of course he's doing more connections to the military industrial complex are revealed, and then we'll talk about it. Just that like the way that MTG has been speaking out, and I think I saw some reporting about Trump asking people about, hey, what's going on with MTG? Because I think Trump recognizes that a lot of his power depends on fairly ignorant white rural voters or white suburban voters, and that MTG is the incarnation of the MAGA base. And if she's over Israel, which she has very vocally became over the past weeks and months. I think that's a key part of why Trump was willing to take this step. Allow me to take a moment to condemn again genocide Joe Biden. It was fascinating. I was at a Brooklyn house party, and people were like, "Wait, it's just over? How is it just over?" And it's because the president said it's over.
Yeah.
This has been the
So something you said before, quite often one of the jobs of the American president is to tell Israel to stop killing.
yeah, in service to Israel. Israel needs that. The Palestinians obviously need that. The world needs that. And Joe Biden manifestly, at any point, Joe Biden could have done this. Probably not
Yeah.
in like the first two months or so. But like that November ceasefire, if Biden had wanted it to continue, it would have continued. And easily 50 to 100,000 Palestinians would be alive, as well as many more Israeli hostages. Biden absolutely had that in his power. He could have ended this in June 2024, which could have, God, I mean, Donald Trump is not is not a difficult person to beat. Biden could have had that drooling on himself debate performance and stayed in and probably beaten Trump if it weren't for the Gaza nightmare and what it did to the Democratic coalition. But Biden simply chose not to do that. So fundamentally, the mechanism here, like the reasons why Donald Trump made his choice are complicated, and we've talked about them for 20 minutes, and we'll continue to talk about them. But the mechanism is not complicated at all. At any point from November 2023 on, the U.S. president just had to say no and stop, and this would have ended. And
Yeah.
it is to the internal damnation of Joe Biden that it was left to Donald Trump to say stop in January of 2025, and then again in October of 2025. The Qatar thing is really important, and it's fascinating. I don't know if any of you guys noticed. So Steve Witkoff is a guy that we were cautiously optimistic about, Trump's developer friend who came onto the scene with a splash by negotiating that 2-month ceasefire at the beginning of this year,
Yeah.
and has really done nothing else for us lately. And it was interesting how in the closing scenes of these negotiations and the sort of signings and whatnot, you saw Jared Kushner show up, which is interesting because Jared Kushner was front and center in the first Trump administration, but both he and Ivanka have not been anywhere near this current Trump administration. And it's actually quite direct. The reason Jared Kushner was there was to show the Gulf folks that they were getting their money's worth. It's
Okay.
direct. I mean, it is direct. Like the only reason Jared Kushner was showing up for those pictures was to point out that all this money that Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar or Qatar or whatever have contributed to, I think it's Affinity Partners, I believe, is his private equity or whatever fund it is. And yeah, Kushner showed up there to be like, look, I'm here. I'm doing what you want, guys. And that is really, really fascinating. And yes, it absolutely comes down to this September 9th attack on Qatar. There were Hamas folks, Hamas leadership was brought together to consider a peace proposal from Trump and Israel. And Israel, it's an open question how intentional this was by Trump, but it was certainly intentional by Israel, and almost certainly intentional by Trump as well, to collect the Hamas leadership in Qatar to look at a peace offering so they could be bombed.
Wow.
Some people think it's significant that this was a largely failed bombing, managed to kill a lot of family members of the Hamas leadership, but not actually the Hamas leadership. I don't.
Because they do the bedroom bomb thing where they just bomb the hotel they were staying at. So yeah, the
Yeah.
Hamas people were out while the families weren't.
I think Trump thought this was like just another aspect of being tough. This was, he was sort of owning it in certain ways, but I don't think he quite reckoned with how angry that would make Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Traditionally, back in 2016, 2017, thereabouts, UAE and Saudi Arabia broke diplomatic ties with Qatar and were threatening to invade. In the
Wow.
first Trump administration. So traditionally, these are countries that really dislike each other. They have, despite having similar ideologies, similar disgusting, ancient, absolute monarchy approaches to things, they really, really hate each other. And I think Trump was very surprised in the aftermath of the September 9th bombing to see Qatar, UAE, and Saudi Arabia presenting a unitedly outraged front. And I think this probably was the reason Kushner was showing up in all the sort of signing ceremonies and the negotiation photographs this past week, is because the Gulf got unified and said, hey, bucko, what are we paying you for?
But are they like terrified they'll be the next Iran? Because it just feels like they're just picking random nearby countries to have a bombing campaign with.
Well, yes, of course, they're absolutely terrified. This is why
So it feels like everything has to be escalated.
yeah, they are absolutely terrified. And I think what they did more successfully than I was expecting was they brought home, specifically through the billions of dollars. The way that these private equity investments work, Rory, is not like they write a check to Jared Kushner for X billion dollars. What happens is they make a commitment to Jared Kushner for X billion dollars. And you think about this is a direct line of control that the Gulf has over the Trump family. So they make a commitment for X billion dollars, and then Jared Kushner, over the next years, comes up with fun investment ideas, comes up with companies that they should buy through his fund. So it's an ongoing system of bribery. They've made these billion-dollar commitments, but they can call up Jared Kushner and be like, we're obviously not going to meet your next, capital call if we're not getting what we want to get here. So
Is it possible they could also ask for the shares to be sold so they could get whatever money's been invested back?
that's a lot harder to do.
Okay.
If this fund, which is mostly Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar,
Yeah.
and then I'm sure a bunch of other investors that are much smaller, you kind of have to do what they want if you want to continue getting more funds from them. But I don't think legally there would be any requirement to do so. That's sort of the particularities of these funds. That approach to doing things is there's no guarantee you get any of your money back. That's sort of how these private equity venture capital things work. The idea is you get access to more secretive, more like inside deal stuff that's going to have greater returns, but you could also lose everything because it's higher risk. So there's no like statutory reason they should be able to claw things back. But they've been more successful, I think, because all these Gulf monarchies that traditionally hate each other got together to be like, what the hell is going on? And that, combined with the two blonde women, with Maloney and MTG, and then combined with all of the full spectrum pressure that the Israeli government is feeling from everybody else, I believe that Israel does a ton of business with the EU, and to be just clearly losing Italy, had an
Well, I
impact.
think it's like Israel is very dependent on the EU for just day-to-day things like food and cars and things like that. But it's a one-way street because it's like Israel's like less than 1% of who the EU deal with. So they could easily lose Israel and
Exactly.
are happy enough, while Israel are in dire straits without them.
And I think in Israel, they became more receptive to this sort of thing because they're recognizing that just how completely they are losing Europe over this. So yeah, like it's a multi-factor thing, but absolutely, I think it is that Qatar bombing was a bridge too far for the Gulf, for Europe, for everybody. And that is why Donald Trump did what he was always capable of doing, which was just saying, enough. To be clear, Gaza is destroyed in a truly horrific way. The Sudan comparison is like, so the closest thing in Sudan that is analogous to what's happening in Gaza is the town of El Fasher, which has been under a siege by the Rapid Support Forces, a UAE-supported militia group, for almost 2 years now. So like 500 days. Has been under siege. 250,000 people are under siege there. It does seem like quite Gaza-like in terms of like the numbers of dwellings that have been destroyed. Nowhere near the volume of bombs dropped. Nowhere near, but it's
Well, because they just don't have the money, but they would if they could.
yeah. So serious destruction, now serious malnutrition. But it was interesting reading this BBC article this morning on El Fasher, and it's like they have a sense of what's happening in El Fasher because people can run away. Like people can leave. And the entirety of Sudan, El Fasher is the worst, I believe, most agree. The entirety of Sudan, a country of 40 million people, is a war zone. But it is a war zone between two sides that are competing. and people can run away from wherever the fights are and can move to other parts of Sudan where there is less fighting. They can go live in refugee camps. What makes Al Fashir so horrifying is this was a hub for refugees that is being now besieged, but they can go away. They can go somewhere else. Gaza is a concentrated, tiny piece of land under complete sci-fi dystopia control of an infinitely more powerful, infinitely more wealthy country, Israel, that it was always a part of. Like, it was always a subject place. It was always like, imagine if at the start of this civil war in Sudan, El Fashir had, the RSF had 20 years worth or 60 years worth of fencing and fortifications around El Fashir to keep
Yeah.
anybody from going out. So it's like, it is just so much worse than anything else that has happened this century. It's not going to get better. It is not going to be the only thing we can hope for at this point, and I am hopeful for this at this point, is that the constant slaughter stops. And we've been there for the past 6 days. The constant slaughter has stopped. It's, as we're about to dive into this 20-point plan, there is no the 20-point plan is guaranteed to fail. This genocide is going to continue slowly, but that I don't want to detract from Trump's accomplishment here for just doing the basic thing that U.S. presidents are supposed to do, because the genocide will continue slowly, but it's so much better slowly than it is quickly.
Has Trump saved Benjamin Netanyahu? Because Israel was in quite unstable politically. Like, it seemed to be a lot of hatred towards him, and the country was not necessarily about to collapse, but it wasn't, it's not in a good shape. Has this really sort of given him a lifeline and somewhat saved Israel?
Well, I think it's way too early to tell. It's way too early to
Yeah.
tell on a lot of fronts. Will his coalition fall apart? I don't know. Will, by the time this is uploaded on Monday, will the ceasefire have been
Oh, yeah, yeah.
entirely broken? And to be clear, like, Israel is already on the first day, they're doing these absurd catch-22s. So the UN
Is this
announced,
the bodies?
yes, yeah.
So basically, like, yeah, they've been swapping bodies back, and Israel's like, this isn't the right body. But basically, because there's so many bodies and they're so decayed and fragmented, it's hard to tell bodies from other bodies. So yeah, they're basically saying, oh, this whole deal's over because this one body we can't identify properly.
Well, it's more sinister. So Israel can't actually do this whole deal's over and like dive back into it, because then Trump would be like, "Hey, what the hell? I just said you're not doing that." What they're doing is exactly what I was worried about with Donald Trump, who I predicted would be able to get ceasefires, is that they are using this question of dead Israeli hostages who like are dead because they were blown up by Israel. Like
Yeah.
they are dispersed body parts intermingled with a bunch of other.
Something I keep thinking about a lot is the what you pointed out the last time, the self-licking ice cream cone. Like, Israel has killed these people and then is like, "Oh, we're gonna have to kill more Palestinians because we killed these people, our own citizens." Like, it's just this horrible cycle of death.
But it's also just it's a logistic impossibility. It's like
Yeah.
finding these body parts that have been smeared, like, they're probably in tunnels, buried under tons of stuff. Like, they're still trying to, I mean, they're going to spend the next years finding the Palestinian bodies.
Yeah.
So even the US government, even the Trump administration was like, yeah, there should be more flexibility about this. But the Israelis weren't like, oh, we can use this to restart. They're saying, oh, we're not going to feed you. So
Mhm.
they're basically saying, "Oh, we're not gonna let aid in because,"
Yeah.
and that's just, and I think that did get pushed back on, but this is the kind of BS that Israel's going to be doing 24/7. And this week,
On World Food Day, Israel continues to reduce aid into Gaza.
yes,
So that is the 16th of October.
yeah, and this week, the Trump administration is paying attention because the Gulf and Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, have focused minds. But next week, what about next week? What about the week after that? And I think what's
Also, there's the worry that the Trump administration is very like, oh, look at this brand new thing, and it's the best thing ever, and our enemies are the worst. It's like everything has to be new and exciting and escalation. So it's possible once this is boring and old news, like, yeah, get back to killing as many as you
yeah.
want.
Yeah. And exactly, and there's another really fiendish one is that they're trying to claim there's too much looting to send aid in, and to send in more aid. And it's like, yeah, like, there's a lot of looting because you're sending in like 5 trucks when you need 500.
Thousands.
Yeah, you need thousands a day. And obviously those 5 trucks are going to get mobbed by starving people. Like, so this is the,
And also by Israeli citizens that keep attacking them.
yes, the bad faith is endless and bottomless, and we would need to have a competent presidential administration. But I do have a hope that with pressure from the EU, from the UN, from others folks, like that starvation could be ameliorated. And I do believe that Israel recognizes that the pace of bombing that they've maintained over the past year is simply unsustainable and indefensible. I'm in the camp that I'm quite glad that these Israeli hostages, all the alive ones, have been returned. They were a tremendous justification for the continuation of this war. So when, it's not if, it's when Israel restarts the slaughter, they have dramatically less justification for what they're going to be doing. And I think that is a positive. It's a
also
plus.
just the fact a lot of the Israeli hostages looked fairly healthy in comparison to the hostages that the Palestinian hostages.
Yeah. Oh, of course. And it's insane that people are like, oh, it's, these heroic hostages are released in return for these terrorists. And it's like, so there's 250 of the 2,000 Palestinians that were traded for these 20 hostages. 250 of them were convicted of something in an Israeli court.
Yeah.
1,700 of them were hostages. Like they had no judicial process, administrative detention, just taken by the Israeli government as hostages, kept in camps, abused horrifically, as you've pointed out, and with zero even a fiction of judicial rationality to it. So they were just hostages. And it's always worth pointing out that, the reason that there are thousands of Palestinian hostages traded for dozens of Israeli hostages every time is because there are tens of thousands of Palestinian hostages held by the Israeli state, and it's quite horrifying. Oh, I did want to Jeremy Scahill. I just want to recommend the Chapo Trap House, which is a podcast I used to really enjoy. Honestly, I'm a little over their whole approach to things, but they had on Jeremy Scahill and Ryan Grimm from Dropside News.
Yeah.
And there's just a really great coverage of what's going on here that has certainly informed what we've been talking about today. But I really appreciated just the way that Jeremy Scahill described Trump's tour. First, going and speaking to the Israeli parliament and doing like a stand-up act where he's like,
but I actually asked her once, I said, so Miriam, I know you love Israel. What do you love more, the United States or Israel? She refused to answer. That might mean Israel, I must say.
Which is just an insane thing for him to be out.
Was that the billionaire? Because I listened to that episode. It's like,
she's got 60 billion in the bank, 60 billion. And she loves, I think she's saying no more.
That was so Miriam.
And then also he was pointing out like, hey, they don't like you here. They all like me.
Yeah. To Netanyahu. Yeah. He basically called that whole performance reverse Nuremberg. So whereas the Nuremberg trials, like the Nazis got what they deserved, this was like the opposite. It was basically all the worst.
They got a lap of honor.
The worst war criminals imaginable celebrating in the Israeli parliament. And he called it the reverse Nuremberg to Cuckfest, which was he went over to Egypt to basically have a whole bunch of fewer and fewer. It was funny watching people drop out of this as it got announced, but he got Sisi at least to come over and sort of cup his balls and talk about how great he was at peace and whatnot. And I thought that was a great formulation. Reverse Nuremberg to Cuckfest. So just before we get into look, Israel is not serious about this. You've got plenty of Israeli politicians like coming out and publicly saying, folks in the Netanyahu camp saying this isn't serious. We're just doing this because we were told to. I mean, part of that is just how this works. A president restrains an Israeli politician because the Israeli public wants more blood. And that's like the traditional dance. It's like they say they're going to do it and then they sort of sell for it. And I think there is an aspect of this where like there's a lot of like the Israeli government saying, oh, no, we want to do more, but the American president won't let us. That's the normal dance and that's good. But I think you just look at their actions and how they're already screwing up aid, how they're clearly going to be as savage as they can be just the second that Trump's gaze moves on, which has probably already happened. But I do want to say that, like, also as we go through this 20-point plan, which is we're going to be doing more and more quickly as the time goes on, there's a really fundamental mismatch here, which is that Hamas has not lost. As was always obvious, Hamas has won. The Palestinian people.
They were doing a lot of executions as soon as it was sort of shocking to see how just how like structured they were. As soon as it was like, yeah, you're allowed out of your tunnels now. They had their uniforms on, they had their guns. You know, these grisly executions of alleged people that were collaborating with Israel. Like, it was a bit like, what has Israel been doing all this time when it's just been murdering all these children?
Well, that's the thing, is like Israel was never fighting Hamas. Israel was doing what it could to ethnically cleanse the territory. They were not fighting Hamas. They were fighting houses. They're fighting habitation. They're intentionally, I mean, it's just normal, and nobody challenges or questions the fact that I think the largest single mass death event for Israeli soldiers was because a bunch of them got trapped in their exploding of a housing
in a
complex.
building.
Yeah. So like they're just systematically destroying any living situations, like any place where humans can live. That's what the main war was. It was the extermination of those that they could exterminate, but creating a situation. And I think they were largely successful in this. I think we're going to, when that Rafah crossing opens, I think we're going to see a lot of people leaving. Yes, the Egyptian government will never openly say we're taking in tons of Palestinians, but like, what do you think all of these GoFundMes and things are for? I mean, they are for getting families out of Gaza. So it's going to take
Yeah, but
bribes.
like if you were in Gaza, would you not go to Egypt as soon as you could?
Of course. And I don't hold anything against the individuals, but it's clear that Israel is going to be largely. It's clear to me that Israel is going to be largely successful. I think at this point, there's probably still like 1.8 million people in Gaza. There are already hundreds of thousands of people who managed to flee at exorbitant prices. There have been hundreds of thousands of people who've been killed. But I think at the end of the Trump administration, even if we stay at this very low level, dozen people a week's level of slaughter, it'll go from, like, these numbers are all entirely made up, but from 1.8 million down to 1.3 million, because with the crossing open, the price to get out will be a lot cheaper, and many, many more people will do this because they've made it unlivable. And the key thing here is throughout this 20-point plan, it's like, okay, after Hamas, after Hamas is not happening. And by the terms of the agreement that Israel agreed to, they're not obligated to withdraw any more than they already have. And they are in, I think, complete control of 60% of Gaza now. Probably nowhere near that population. Like of the three main cities, two of them, the majority, are in the not IDF controlled place. But they've got 60% of Gaza, and they're not obligated to leave until a international stabilization force comes in and takes over, and none of that is ever going to happen.
I keep hearing like they just want a bunch of like rich Middle Eastern countries to basically, surround the perimeter of Gaza. Like, I can't see that.
No, that's not happening. And they had some pretty amusing discussion of that on the Chapa Trapas podcast.
Israel exploding robots still terrorize Gaza neighborhoods. I'm just reading some random headlines from Al Jazeera.
That's just going to continue. But even under so Israel's going to be as bad faith as possible, but under the terms of the agreement, Hamas is supposed to go away before any reconstruction happens, and Hamas isn't going away. Like, there was no real fight against Hamas. I think they managed to kill Sinwar, the leader, in Rafah, I think probably because he decided to martyr himself, went out looking for, Israelis to fight. So what's going to happen is that we're going to be in this kind of...
Gaza will be de-radicalized. That's what's going to happen.
Well, yes, that's
and become a terror-free zone, which is number one.
Exactly. That is point one on the 20-point plan, and it's simply not going to happen. And that's a theme on this 20-point plan, is that there's just none of this, some of this stuff there's stuff on this that has already happened. And that's everything on this 20-point plan that is ever going to happen. And I just briefly before we get into it, like, This is the new status quo for Gaza, infinitely worse than before October 7th. And it's just going to be like this as people wick away for months or years. That's the best case here. Or the bombs could be dropping again more intensely by the time this is published on Monday. But yeah, let's look at this 20-point plan. So we've already dealt with number one. Gaza will not be a de-radicalized zone that does not pose a threat to its neighbors. That is simply not going to happen. Gaza will be redeveloped for the benefit of the people of Gaza who have suffered more than enough. That sounds lovely.
Oh, yeah, that's one we can all agree with.
Will never happen because Israel, I think, will have some legitimacy in saying, wait, Hamas is still there. We're not going to allow any real money in. If both sides agree to this proposal, the war will immediately end. That has largely happened. Israeli forces will withdraw to the agreed-upon line to prepare for hostage release. That happened. During this time, all military operations, include aerial and artillery bombardment, will be suspended and battle lines will remain frozen until conditions are met for the complete staged withdrawal.
Which hasn't happened.
That complete staged withdrawal, I think, will never happen. Within 72 hours of Israel completely publicly accepting this agreement, all hostages, alive and deceased, will be returned. We've already covered that there are difficulties. To be clear, so on 29th of September, I think it was more or less this text was announced. Hamas said, we agree with part of this, but we don't agree with other parts of this. And then Trump kind of shocked them by saying, cool, Hamas agrees, we're doing this. And Israel was like, wait, what? And even Hamas was like, wait, what? Okay. So, and then I think there was another deal that was more or less agreed to on, was it the 10th or no, I think it's on October 8th, but it was different, not just from the stuff that Hamas agreed to, it was actually different from the stuff that the Arab countries agreed to. So like it's all, I mean, this is all up in the air and
all vibes.
Yeah, this is all vibes and nonsense. But anyway, once all the hostages are released, Israel will release 250 life sentence prisoners plus 1,700 Gazans who were detained after 17 October 2023. These are not terrorists. These are people that
were just grabbed.
They have not brought charges against. For every Israeli hostage whose remains are released, Israel will release the remains of 15 deceased Gazans. So think about that for a second. So Israel just has coolers full of dead Gazans.
Yeah, like so one of those things because I was thinking about, but the other thing was I remember when this conflict first started off, something I felt uncomfortable saying was like a quote Benjamin said is, if they kill one of us, we like to kill 20 of them. And this kind of is that in writing. If you give us one dead Israeli, we'll give you 15 of your own back.
Yeah, and like the hostage numbers are similar. Yeah, this is just how it's going. Once all the hostages are returned, Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence and to decommission their weapons will be given amnesty. While Hamas members are carrying out mass executions. I think it's an interesting question, like who is Hamas killing? And the answer is they're probably doing both of these. They are probably killing traitorous gangs that worked with Israel, that worked to make aid harder to get, that worked to make things worse. They're probably killing those guys, but they're also probably killing completely innocent people who like tweeted, damn it, why is Hamas doing this to us? So like, it's probably both. Like, that's my expectation. Israel is, I believe, continuing to arm and maintain anti-Hamas militias, while Donald Trump is saying, hey, like if Gaza's got to kill these militias, they've got to. So it's just an insane mess and that is not going to get resolved here. So yeah, Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence will be given amnesty. I think it's pretty clear that. And
can you see that happening?
Well, I think any Hamas member that attempted to take advantage of that would be shot by other members of Hamas. So this is a indigenous resistance freedom movement, and if you know anything about that, they don't take kindly to people who do that. In the United States, I don't think we shot many, but we certainly took all the property of people like that and sent them to Canada. And the North Vietnamese and their South Vietnamese wings were always pretty brutal. I mean, the Houthis are pretty brutal. This is what Hamas is. Upon acceptance of this agreement, full aid will be immediately sent into the Gaza Strip. That has not happened. At a minimum, aid quantities will be consistent with those included in the 19th January 2025 agreement. Again, this has not happened. I have hopes that that at least the starvation will stop, if only because it's honestly in Israel's interest. Yeah. So I do hope that we will get somewhere. We'll never get to full aid. There'll never be enough aid. Even before October 7th, it's been certainly a controversial, but many argue that even before October 7th, Israel was making sure that, Gaza didn't get too much food.
Well, I didn't see any fat ones, Rob.
Yeah. That sort of approach. I mean, that was even before October 7th. So
Mm-hmm. Also, the whole, like, do you remember the dock America tried to make? Like, you could almost open it up for the world to feed Gaza, but I don't think that's possible the way
Well,
they.
it's very possible, actually. It's incredibly possible. And that's
Okay.
one of the great horrors of this. If there's hunger issues, and there absolutely are in Sudan, this is Darfur. This is landlocked. Sure, Sudan has outlets on the Red Sea, but Darfur is thousands of miles away through enemy territory. Gaza's on the coasts. That's why the flotillas come through, and there are more flotillas coming of activists.
One of the most historically important bodies of water on Earth.
Yeah. So that's the thing, to have malnutrition
And it does have ports.
in a place where that is so directly accessible is pretty horrifying. Entry of distribution and aid in the Gaza Strip will proceed without interference from the two parties through the United Nations and its agencies, the Red Crescent. This is already not happening. Number 9, Gaza will be governed under the temporary transitional governance of a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee responsible for just the sheer not happeningness of this entire paragraph here is ridiculous, but worth focusing on, because everything in this deal depends on all of these things that are never going to happen. The temporary transitional governance of a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee responsible for delivering day-to-day running of public services, municipalities for the people in Gaza. If they were actually ever to put something together like this together, Israel would instantly proclaim that they were Hamas, no matter what. Palestinian Authority, which actually legitimately hates Hamas, has fought civil wars against Hamas, has been trying to get in to run Gaza for 2 solid years now, eager to work with Israel despite the genocide. And Israel has adamantly refused this because it is one of Israel's main interests to keep the two main Palestinian territories divided and antagonistic. So they do not want the Palestinian Authority that runs the West Bank to come into Gaza, even though they are obviously the best seated people to do that. If you're talking about this technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee, the Palestinian Authority would be the obvious people to do it, and they absolutely won't be allowed to by Israel. Because, again, this is just Israel. The whole Israel and Palestine is completely controlled by Israel. The Palestinians are a subject population. This was not a war. It was an extermination. This committee, he made up of qualified Palestinians and international experts with oversight and supervision by a new international transitional body, the Board of Peace, which will be headed and chaired by President Donald J. Trump. With other members, it's amazing that this actually went into the language. With other members and heads of state to be announced, including former Prime Minister Tony Blair.
Wow.
Just the
This has really been his year. He's got his ID cards, and now he's like brought peace to Gaza.
Tony Blair,
and he's going to walk around personally and sort this out.
Tony, it's funny. I remember being in London in 1997, and it's really evocative form of political advertising.
Why are you always in big cities when their dictators get voted in? You had Erdogan and now Tony Blair.
I don't know, man. It's we're always. Oh man, I've got family members who do even worse. I've got one who was in Syria, in Daraa, when the Syrian civil war kicked off, which is quite something.
Quite lively.
Yeah, quite lively. Had nothing to do with it. But
allegedly.
Yeah, so I was 96, 90, 97, and it's one of the first, I was, I guess, 16, 17 years old, and one of the first political advertisements that really stuck with me was it was New Labor, New Danger. And it was this picture of Tony Blair, who does have kind of like a demonic smile, but it like really emphasized it, or like there was like a tearaway part and you saw like a demon eyes and demon smile or whatnot. And it's funny how unfair I saw that as the time, and Tony Blair, look at him, he's great, big friends with Clinton and this, that, and the other thing, and almost 30 years later, I'm like, nope, that's a pretty good depiction of Tony Blair.
That was bang on.
Yeah, and he really just looks more. I feel like he's had periods where he's
got more demonic.
He's got this long hair and his grin's gotten bigger, and he's just gross.
He's just gotten more powerful because he's charged of like a massive think tank that's very powerful.
Yeah, he's I don't know how powerful he is, but I do know he's gross. And he's
Hmm.
yeah, so this was apparently, and really, I mean, this was a guy who was nominally from the left wing of politics, and to become first George W. Bush's peon and then to be just sort of like a throwaway mention in Donald Trump's peace plan. I mean, God, if that man had any dignity.
But all he ever did was bring peace to the Middle East. That's when people think Tony Blair, that's what they
Yeah,
think.
clearly. So yeah, this body will set. So we've got like 2 layers of boards that are neither of which are ever going to exist. There was apparently
Hmm.
someone asked Trump about this, about the Tony Blair aspect, and he was like, "Well, it depends. I'll check out. I'll see how popular Tony is with people. He seems like
Hmm.
he's less popular than I thought." And it's just amazing. This body will set the framework and handle the funding for the redevelopment of Gaza until such time as the Palestinian Authority has completed its reform program as outlined in various proposals, including President Trump's peace plan in 2020, which is, and the Saudi-French proposal, and can securely and effectively take back control of Gaza. Like, none of this is ever going to happen. Number 10, a Trump economic development plan to rebuild and energize Gaza will be created by convening a panel of experts who have helped birth some of the thriving modern miracle cities in the Middle East, like Neom. This is like
Yes.
Neom. This is saying, geez. Anyway, many thoughtful investment pros. Okay, it's just a joke. A special economic zone will be established with preferred tariff and access rates to be negotiated with participating countries. Sure. Number 12, this is key. No one will be forced to leave Gaza. At the beginning of his second term, Trump announced that everybody was going to leave so America could rebuild
Hmm.
it as the Riviera, which
Yes.
was sort of a throwaway thing for Trump to say that the Israeli government ran with horrifically over the past 10 months. And it is important and it is good that they are saying no one will be forced to leave Gaza. However, it is just a simple fact that everybody will want to leave Gaza. And I think I mentioned this on Twitter, and I get a lot of pushback, and I get it. And like, obviously, Egypt is not going to be like, yes, of course, build a big refugee camp. But everybody in Gaza who can put together the bribes necessary will do everything they can. Not everybody, but a lot of people will do everything they can to get the heck out of there, and they will never be allowed to go back. And that is just
Because Egypt has taken in like a lot of refugees from North Africa. Like it's a common thing to happen,
yeah, I mean
and it's a massive population.
yeah, they have the ability to absorb. It's funny. I'd never really thought about how many Syrian refugees Egypt took. And I'm sure, I mean, they have a
And
long-standing,
one's from Libya and stuff, I'm sure, as
well, they
well.
have a long-standing history of migrant labor and certainly a pretty grim relation to historic slave trading and stuff and everything. Hamas and other factions agree to not have any role in the governance of Gaza. That's not happening. I mean, who knows? Anything's possible, but I highly doubt that that's happening. A guarantee will be provided by regional partners to ensure that Hamas and the factions comply with their obligations and that New Gaza poses no threat to its neighbors or its people. Good effing luck. Okay, the United States will work with Arab and international partners to develop a temporary international stabilization force to immediately deploy in Gaza. Again, not happening. The ISF will train and provide support to vetted Palestinian police forces in Gaza after Israel has spent 2 years killing all the police forces in Gaza, bragging about it, and will consult with Jordan and Egypt who have extensive experience in this field. The force will be the long-term internal security solution. The ISF will work with, we don't need to read any more of this. The ISF is never happening. Israel will not occupy or annex Gaza. Israel is occupying Gaza, and I don't expect
Well, I like that start of that
Yeah,
one.
it's great, but Israel is
I like 16.
well, you like 16 until the second sentence, because
Yes.
it's Israel will not occupy or annex Gaza as the ISF establishes control and stability, which means Hamas-free territory. The IDF will withdraw. So the ISF is never going to establish control and stability. There is some mention, and I don't, talking about areas that are controlled by the IDF rather than Hamas, and some idea that there might be some attempt to have some places that are controlled by the ISF and some parts that are controlled by Hamas, and that just seems pretty farcical to me, frankly.
Yeah.
What Arab country is going to be like, yeah, we're going to come in here and be your like cannon fodder to maintain Israeli occupation of Gaza? So yeah, I think we've emphasized enough that we don't need to go through the rest of these 20 points. Like, it's just not a thing. Like, these 20 points, they're not things that are going to happen.
Yes, they're sort of too vague and contrarian, and Israel just doesn't want it to happen. But yeah, I think
But of course, 19 and 20, while Gaza redevelopment advances and while the Palestinian Authority reform program is faithfully carried out, the conditions may finally be in place for a credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood, which we recognize as the aspiration of the Palestinian people. The United States will establish a dialogue between Israel and Palestinians to agree on a political horizon for peaceful and prosperous coexistence. Yeah, it's just,
But like, if you were an absolute neutral country, you're like, I don't care. This new place is being built. You're like, why would I ever? Like, I've seen what Israel does to places. I've seen what it's done to it before and what it has the capability of doing. I'd be like, I'll just build anywhere else on earth.
So a lot depends going forward on whether Israel can step back from its current positioning. Because its current positioning is, we are the godlike emperors of the Middle East, and we can murder anybody we want in any country we want. And with the full backing of the United States for the next decade or so, they can do that. If they do that for the next decade or so, they will create such a incredible backlash that the Israeli state would actually be in legitimate danger. So,
But also, I'm thinking of something like El Trapo was saying about how, like, before Israel was pulling out of certain areas, they were destroying like the sewage works that like Germany built and stuff. Like, just basic fundamentals that a society needs are like, yeah, they're not allowed that.
yeah, no, they're here to destroy. But I think it is, if Israel cares at all about its future existence, it will probably, after the Netanyahu and his Yahoos, they will end up going on a large public relations blitz and trying to rebuild. Is it possible? Is it practicable? Is it something that could actually happen or be convincing? I doubt it. But hey, people still love the United States, and we do a lot of horrible shit. So,
But it's also just something on the Jon Stewart. They were like, well, I know you don't believe America's power is going to wane too much, but in a sort of, say, in a world where China's more powerful than America, say ever so slightly, like, and if America doesn't need Israel, stops funding it, like, Israel's in a terrible position.
yes, undeniably. Yeah.
Like, if China's a bit more influence, it's like, you've done some horrendous things that the whole world has seen. Like, it's not a good future for Israel.
And that's why it's so important that they do this sort of public relations blitz. Whether or not they're capable of it, I couldn't tell you. But it is obviously not a great couple of years for Palestine. But hoo boy, has it not been a great couple of years for Israel either. It's all rather bleak. And God, I hope that by the time you're all listening to this, we're still in a ceasefire period. And I think it's possible that this ceasefire period could last for months or even years. But there's certainly more horror to come.
It's sad that the best case scenario is back to slow killing and hopefully flee to Egypt if you can.
Yes, I'm afraid that's where we're probably at. But
so on that somewhat cheerier note than previous weeks of the situation.
Yeah, that's the horrifying thing, that this is this is the woohoo.
This is the good news.
Yeah, this is the good news episode on Gaza. But it is actually, because the slaughter has slowed down.
Yes, so we will catch you next time, and hopefully by the time this goes out, the ceasefire is still functioning.
Indeed.
The More Freedom Foundation is also available on YouTube and TikTok. Rob's Twitter is RobOLaw, and he's also written a book called Avoiding the British Empire, What It Was and How the US Can Do Better. And music provided by Kevin MacLeod.